That was all bushes that were probably this tall, so we couldn't see him until he stood up. He's just staring at us from the bushes. That was pretty jarring, but then he just walked out of the bushes, so then we just assumed he's just smoking weed or something.
Saturday morning, December 14, 1991. In the thin mist that shrouded Federal Way High School in Washington State, 2 middle school students were taking a shortcut through the bushes behind the parking lot. On the deserted path reserved for early morning practice, they weren't expecting to see anyone, but what awaited them in the bushes was something they would never forget. A strange man standing in the bushes, motionless. He didn't say anything. He just looked. That look, according to Drew Miller, the first person to see him, was shocking and chilling. In a split second, the man stepped out of the bushes and quietly walked away, without a word. Sarah was a familiar face at the school, an energetic, intelligent 11th grader, the captain of the drill team. With a bright smile and her blonde hair always tied back, she was always there early to prepare for practice. That morning she had come to school, but never entered the gym. It was cold. The atmosphere was still and still. No one expected that in a safe place like the schoolyard, something unusual had quietly happened. And what haunted people for 3 decades afterwards was, what was he doing in the bushes, and why was he looking at them like that? Sarah left home around 8 a.m. She drove her dark blue Honda Accord into the parking lot at Federal Way High School. It was a dress rehearsal for the marching band, and she was always the first one to arrive. Everything was going as usual, until she failed to show up on time, as she usually did. At 8:15, a few students on the marching band started calling her, thinking that Sarah might be late, but her car was still in the parking lot, untouched. The doors were locked, and her bag was still inside. The sky was gray, the wind was cold, and no one knew what was coming. At the same time, 2 middle school students were walking through the path behind the school, a place that was rarely used early in the morning. They had no idea that a strange man had left just minutes earlier. No one noticed where he came from, only that he appeared and disappeared in a few moments, leaving behind an inexplicable thing. The day before, a teacher had seen Sarah sitting alone in her car for an unusually long time, looking worried. But when asked, she had just smiled and said, "I'm thinking about the performance." No one noticed that she had complained that week about a stranger standing at the school gate late in the afternoon, doing nothing, just watching. In the residential area near the school, a neighbor said she had heard a car stop abruptly early in the morning, then go silent. But thinking it was a parent's car taking their child to school, she paid no attention. Some children playing near the woods behind the school said they had seen someone in a black coat standing in the shade of a tree several times, but they didn't dare approach. There were no security cameras in that area in 1991. The school used only security lights and a part-time guard, who was not on the morning shift that day. The absence of surveillance left the backyard largely unseen for hours. What happened after 8:15 a.m. and before 9 a.m., when the body was found, is a blank. Sarah did not leave the car. No one heard her scream. The journey from the parking lot to the small wooded area was less than 100 meters, but it was the shortest distance to tragedy. When Drew Miller and his classmates stepped into the wooded lot behind the school, they didn't expect it to be a morning they would remember for the rest of their lives. They had originally intended to take the shortcut to the gym, the familiar path that led to the back of the garage. But what they encountered amid the low trees and damp grass was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Drew was the first to notice. He didn't dare approach, but he knew what he saw was wrong. A female body lying on its side, her hair hanging down to the leaf-covered ground. She wasn't moving. There was no sign of a struggle, no moans, no cries for help, just an eerie silence. A silence that didn't belong in a place that was usually filled with the laughter of students. The call to 911 was recorded at 9:12 a.m. The student's voice trembled, broken but clear. "There's someone lying motionless in the bushes. We don't know if she's alive." Less than 10 minutes later, the first patrol car arrived at the scene. Police immediately cordoned off the area, ordering the evacuation of students who were coming for morning practice. The scene was kept almost completely intact due to its remote location and low traffic. The victim lay on her side, one arm stretched out, the other bent slightly as if trying to raise it. Her face was slightly swollen, her blonde hair partially covering her eyes. There were no signs of a struggle around her. Nothing was disturbed near the body, except for a small dent in the ground near her feet, as if someone had been standing there for quite a while. Sarah's car door was locked, and her belongings were intact. There was no sign of anyone trying to open the door or trying to break in. That led the police to rule out robbery almost immediately. A teacher who arrived early and stood near the fence, when he saw the scene, whispered, "Why didn't anyone hear anything?" At the police station, Drew was questioned in more detail about the man he saw coming out of the bushes before discovering the body. He described him as thin, wearing a dark coat, walking quickly but not in a hurry, not looking back, and especially without expression. However, what made the police stop to write down was a seemingly unintentional sentence of Drew. "I think he was standing there before we got there, but somehow we didn't notice." At that time, no one expected that this seemingly vague sentence would open up a completely different direction of investigation, beyond all initial predictions. Investigators began barricading the area shortly after the body was discovered. The sky was still overcast, and a light layer of frost covered the cold, damp ground, making it difficult to read the evidence. But despite the near silence, a few details seemed out of place in the familiar schoolyard. An arm's length away from the body was a white nylon stocking, not Sarah's, since her socks were still on her. The stocking was lying in an unusual position, as if it had been pulled off in a hurry and then dropped back in during the move. Next to it was a piece of black tape, covered in sand and dry leaves, an object that should not have been found in a place where students frequented. The preliminary autopsy report indicated that the victim had been dead about an hour before she was discovered, around 8 o'clock. But according to witnesses, Sarah's car had been seen parked at the school around 8:10. The timing didn't add up. That raised a terrifying possibility. Sarah could have been overpowered as soon as she got out of the car. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, but strangely, there were no signs of a struggle. No broken fingernails, no scratches on the hands. On the victim's neck, there was a clear mark from a soft, cloth-like object, perhaps a sock or a towel. In Sarah's left hand, her non-dominant hand, was a long, dark brown strand of hair. It had been clutched as a last-ditch reflex. The detail that gave the forensic team the longest pause was a small bruise on her right wrist, next to the bracelet Sarah always wore. It wasn't deep, but the color suggested it had appeared hours before. A squeeze, perhaps from a stronger hand, or a sign of prior control. It's possible that Sarah had seen the person before, one expert said, and maybe she suspected something, but didn't have time to react. One small detail on the wrist, easily overlooked, sent the entire investigation off in a completely different direction. As investigators began to analyze the crime scene, they quickly compiled a list of people who might have come into contact with Sarah on the morning of the murder. Among them, a man in his early 30s, who some had mistaken for a parent because he had been seen near the pickup area, quickly became a suspect due to his erratic presence and unclear purpose. He had no criminal record or personal connection to Sarah, but it was his silence and lack of transparency in his movements that made detectives particularly concerned. A comparison of traces from the crime scene, soil samples, nylon fibers, shoe prints, with the man's jacket and shoes raised suspicions. He was not seen on any of the main cameras at the school entrance, but was seen by several witnesses in the back, an area that was not monitored. When asked about his soiled jacket, he replied vaguely that he had just come to take out the trash. The location was unknown. The initial interrogations gradually revealed small inconsistencies. He claimed that he parked his car in front and walked into the parking lot, but no one confirmed this. When asked about the blue car near the scene, he initially claimed it was his sister's car, then said it might have belonged to an acquaintance. The small changes in details made the suspicions increasingly clear. The key point emerged when the nylon stockings found near the body were sent for examination. At the same time, the morning cleaning staff, who had said he had taken a 30-minute break on the morning of the incident, was reinterrogated. When he heard that the DNA sample from the stockings was being processed, he fell silent, admitting that he had smoked behind the school, but didn't remember the time. His unexpected honesty helped the police focus completely on the other man. The intense interrogation that followed was conducted in closed conditions, without the press present. The police presented a series of circumstantial evidence: soil marks, hairs on the victim's hands, fabric samples that matched the suspect's shirt. He responded with an outward calm, but his hand movements, misdirected gaze, and evasive words betrayed his confusion. When confronted with the evidence of the coat fibers, he simply said, "I came to return the books." At the same time, the forensic team confirmed DNA samples from the victim's socks and hair matched the unidentified profile in the CODIS system. This was a breakthrough, showing that the suspect had left biological traces in a previous incident, but had not been arrested. The turning point came when the police obtained a video from a camera at a house across from the school. Only a few seconds of footage, but enough to change the whole situation. A blue Honda Accord parked. The man got out and walked toward the bushes. His body, his coat, his movements, all matched the sketch from 1991. When the video was shown in the interrogation room, he did not answer immediately, only saying quietly, "I was just curious." But his wandering eyes and lowered voice betrayed his obvious wavering. The police did not stop. They continued to psychologically manipulate him with seemingly harmless questions. "How long did you stand there? Why did you go back to the bushes?" The answers became more and more confused. Contradictory arguments gradually appeared. From standing alone, he switched to saying that someone had passed by, then saying that he couldn't remember anything clearly because it was foggy that morning. The final twist came from a surprise witness, a parent of a student who claimed to have seen a man bending over the bushes at the exact moment Sarah was supposed to have left the car. The witness's description matched perfectly in terms of clothing, build, and time. The police immediately compared the statements and added them to the file. From a nylon stocking, an uneasy look, and a few seconds of video, the pieces gradually filled in. Finally, when forced to face all the evidence, DNA, witnesses, cameras, and conflicting statements, the man just bowed his head, saying nothing more. At that moment, the investigation was closed, not by speculation, but by logic, by technology, and by the perseverance of those who refused to let time erase the truth. When the trial opened on May 10th, 2023 at King County Superior Court, the courtroom was filled with heavy emotions. The suspect, Patrick Nicholas, appeared calm, but his eyes, according to the account, contained an unspoken tension. It was here that the details presented by the prosecution and defense made the atmosphere even more tense. Prosecutors Celia Lee and Mary Barbosa presented a solid line of argument. DNA samples taken from the sock and cigarette matched exactly with DNA found on Sarah's shirt. Dirt on her shoe matched where the body was found. A photo ripped from a fan magazine found in Nicholas's home. Clear evidence of a similarity to the outfit Sarah was wearing when she went missing. They emphasized that Nicholas's actions, which occurred at a time when she should have been attending a rehearsal, showed premeditation and, most importantly, sexual motivation, as outlined by the jury. The defense, led by attorney David Montes, focused on procedural and forensic science issues. They challenged the reliability of the genealogical DNA profile and the forensic process. However, they focused primarily on the argument that Nicholas had no serious criminal record in the previous 30 years, and that he was identified by circumstantial evidence, not direct evidence of behavior, in mitigation. On May 25th, 2023, after 2 weeks of oral arguments and more than a day and a half of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Not guilty of premeditated murder, but guilty of first-degree murder, sexual investigation, and second-degree murder. The ghost of the past 30 years was finally lifted by the law. At sentencing, Judge Josephine Wiggs sentenced Nicholas to a special criminal sentence of 548 months, nearly 46 years, based on the seriousness of the case and the ruling that he would not have the opportunity to re-enter society. During his final statement, Nicholas barely reacted, and his eyes flickered, according to one family member present at the trial. The victim's family, Sarah's parents, her brother, and close friends, took turns speaking. Her mother, Sarah Yarborough, choked up as she spoke. "We never got to go prom dress shopping with her, never got to see her get married, have children." Her brother Andrew spoke of the pain of hearing his father's trembling voice telling us Sarah was dead, an emotion that haunted the young people in his classroom every night. Ann Croney, another victim of Nicholas's attack in 1983, spoke with such rawness and intensity that the courtroom was silent. The Federal Way community and the public were divided. Some supported the harsh sentence to protect children, while a legal advocate warned that some circumstantial evidence might not be convincing enough to warrant a harsh verdict. However, the majority agreed that after nearly 3 decades of waiting, justice has been served. This is one of the most fascinating and deeply debated cases about forensic technology, especially about genetic genealogy, the evidence of which continues to create legal debates in society. Although Nicholas has not pleaded guilty, his lawyers are preparing to appeal the case, which unintentionally supports arguments about legal and technical limitations. In the eyes of many, the sentence of nearly 46 years is an inevitable conclusion, but the pain of the family, the doubts in the hearts of relatives and the community cannot be held back, because such a loss, even if justice has time to ease the pain, but time cannot be returned. More than 3 decades have passed since that gloomy morning, but for Sarah's family, time has not diminished the void she left behind. What remains is not just graduation photos, a few lines in the yearbook, or a memorial bench behind the school, but a quiet but steadfast reminder. Justice may be late, but it is not lost. The Sarah Yarborough case has not only shocked people by the level of calculation of the killer, but also made the whole country reconsider the value of modern forensic technology. Without the advancement of DNA genealogy, without the determination to connect the fragments of evidence scattered over more than 30 years, would the perpetrator have been forgotten in the crowd? Sarah did not live long enough to become the writer she dreamed of, did not enter the university lecture hall, and never witnessed the springs that followed. But her life, cut short too soon, left a lasting mark on her family, friends, and even strangers she never met. And in the end, the question still echoes quietly in the hearts of many. Without DNA, without technology, how many other cases would still lie in the dark? What do you think? Is justice just a matter of time,